Now, with a small prayer, shall we begin our session on Indian church history. Let's pray together. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Mary, seat of wisdom, pray for us. And please switch on your videos. Otherwise, you can, after zooming, you can go for kitchen work, etc., etc. So please switch on your video. And I hope that you will participate as in the classroom. Yes. Once again, welcome and wish you a good session on the topic Indian church history. You know that we are a mixed group. The Indian, a picture of Indian Catholic Church, which is consisted of both Syrian, Latin, and Malankara rites. And we come to the session on church history. What do you mean by, or what we mean by history? The famous historian Will Durant, one of the most renowned historians of the 21st century, Will Durant, once defined history as the record of past event. Record of past event. What is history? It's a record of past event. And now we ask further, what is church history? Church history is a record of the past events of the lives of the church. It is the record of the life of the church. That is a simple definition of church history. Church history is a record of the life of the church. And before starting this session on church history or Indian church history, I would like to share you one thing frankly, that there does not exist in the world an objective history. Hope you can follow me. There does not exist an objective history in the world. As also, it is applicable to the topic church history as well Indian church history. We cannot make an objective church history because it is always recorded or written through the eyes or the perspective of a subject. The author of the church history is always a subject. And so we don't have objective history. So also we don't have an objective church history. This is an Indian church history textbook we are following. It is written by a Syrian Christian or Syro-Malabar in a right, and the record of the Indian church through the perspective of a Syrian Syro-Malabar faithful. So maybe certain things you don't agree with, which is narrated here. So I am telling you one thing, don't give some objective value to any of the findings of this textbook, not only of this text, any historical document, because there does not exist an objective history. History is always recorded or grasped or shared through the perspective of individuals. So their understanding, their knowledge, their experience is always reflected in the record which they have made. So I am taking this subject as for granted that there does not exist an objective church history. So maybe you belongs to a Latin rite or Malankara rite. Maybe you have studied another version of history. That is why I have told you that there are versions of history, because the perspectives of the individuals are different. So this class we are focusing on a Syrian Christian perspective. So I will try my level best to be honest to the history. Okay, welcome. Elements of the history of St. Thomas Christians. That is our topic. This topic include the early history, formation, beginning, origin and formation of faith, Christian faith in the land of India. And the second faith is nourishment and enrichment by the arrival of missionaries. So our topic has two phases. First phase, the early history of Indian church. Second one, the enriched or nourishment period after 16th century, after the coming of missionaries. So we come the first part, the early history of St. Thomas Christians. You know, the Christians in the Indian Peninsula were known as St. Thomas Christians because it is a belief, a tradition, and a social consciousness that St. Thomas the Apostle has preached here and made the native Indians Christians. So the Christians in the Indian Peninsula, especially of the South India, claimed themselves as St. Thomas Christians. So we are dealing with the first phase, the origin and the development of St. Thomas Christians. Now, how could this say the people in India or the Malabar coast could contact with the Mediterranean world? Contacts between Mediterranean world, Mesopotamia, Persia, and Indus Valley began before 4th millennium BC. 4th millennium BC, that is BC 4000 the year. From BC 4000, the South India or the Indus Valley civilization had deep contact with the Mediterranean or Mesopotamian or the Chaldean world. Ancient tablets discovered from Ur, the hometown of the ancestors of Abraham, indicate the existence of trade between Sumer and Indus Valley. You know, Sumer is an ancient civilization, is near the Persian Gulf, at the shore of the two rivers, Euphrates and Tigris. And the Sumer, Ur is a town, belongs to the Sumerian civilization. And the great journey of the forefather Abraham was from this Sumerian town, Ur. And we have stele. Stele means stone tablets. We have discovered present archaeological discoveries have discovered many stele which stand or works as evidence of the Sumerian and Indus Valley civilization, the relationship between Sumerian and Indus Valley civilization. And the contacts between Phoenicia and South India go back to the 2nd millennium BC. Phoenicia was a Greek name of the land Canaan. You know, the biblical land before the invasion and conquest of Israelites was known as Canaan. The word Canaan means lowland, and the word Phoenicia, Phoenicians, is a Greek translation of the name Canaan, which means the land of purple. The word Phoenicia means land of purple. Don't think that Phoenicia is something other than the land of Canaan. It's the same. The Greek name of the land of Canaan was Phoenician. And there was contacts between Phoenicia and South India go back to the 2nd millennium BC. Jews came into contact with South India in the 10th century BC, following the commercial enterprises of Solomon. Solomon is known as the wisest king of Israel, as well as in his period, the kingdom of Israel reached the zenith of its prosperity and wealth. How could he make the kingdom such a prosperous state? It is through the strong commercial relationship with other countries. And among this commercial trade relationship of Solomon, there was South India as one of the strongest allies of Solomon. The king of Hiram of Sur, the contemporary of Solomon, promoted international trade with the South Indian coast. The King Hiram is narrated in the Bible, in the book of the Kings, was a friend of Solomon, and he was also one of the famous personality who promoted international trade with the South Indian coast. So both Solomon and Hiram, from the 10th century millennium, from the Mediterranean coast, initiated and promoted trade relationship between India or South India and the Mediterranean world. In the 7th century BC, South India served as meeting point between traders from east and west. Please note that in the 7th century BC, that is BC 700, South India served as a meeting point between traders from east and west. We see pre-exilic or exilic and post-exilic Jewish immigration in South India. So how the Jews could come Kerala is a point. It is using the same ancient trade route. The Jews migrated to the parts of India, especially South India, and made colonies here. So the ancient Jewish presence in the South Indian coastal areas is not a mystery or a legend. It is a reality. It has 100% possibilities. It is said that 120 ships used to sail every year from Red Sea to the Malabar coast. Every year, 120 ships sailed from Red Sea near Egypt, or the Sinai desert land, and to the Malabar coast. Within 40 days, the monsoon wind brought them to the coast. With the help of the opposite monsoon, these ships used to return to Egypt in the same year. In Kerala, we have two monsoons. First from June to September, and then October to the first week of December. So using the help of this monsoon wind, the ships used to come Kerala and made the return on the second monsoon period. So it was quite natural, quite easy to make this trade relationship, or to make this trade route between Mediterranean world and Malabar coast. Now, the apostles of Jesus Christ were commanded to bring the message of the gospel to the scattered Jews living different parts of the world. The apostle Thomas undertook his first mission throughout the Persian region, including North and South West India. It is said that the apostle Saint Thomas has made 2 journeys, missionary journeys. The first missionary journey was to the Persian region, that is known as the place of Chaldean Church, or the place particularly known as Seleucia Ctesiphon, which was belonged to the ancient Persian Empire. And in AD 50, he undertook the second mission, which was promoted by the Aramaic-speaking Jewish settlement of South India. So the second mission was, he started in AD 50s, and which was prompted by the Aramaic-speaking Jewish settlements of South India. And now the point is that how could the Jews find their settlement in South India? So from 4000 BC onwards, there was trade relationship between the Malabar coast and the Mediterranean world. And at the time of Solomon, this trade relation became its period of zenith. And using the same commercial route, the Jews could, the pre-exilic or exilic or post-exilic Jews could find their way to the South India, and they made many Jewish settlement in the Malabar coast. And it was the mission of Saint Thomas was in fact in search of the scattered Jews. So Jesus himself was told, I have been sent to the scattered sheep of the house of Israel. So too, the mission, the very first mission of the apostles was in search of the scattered sheep of the house of Israel. And he came to know that there are settlements in the Malabar coast, and in search of this Jewish settlement, he made his second missionary journey. It is obvious that the first missionary journey too surely intended to the Jewish settlement in the Persian Empire. It is surprising that the 7 Christian communities established by him were in the vicinity of Jewish settlements. It is believed as strong traditions and our social consciousness is that Saint Thomas has established 7 communities, 7 churches in the Kerala, in the Malabar coast. And it is surprising to know that all these 7 communities or churches, the places, are in the vicinity of the Jewish settlement. So our argument, the first argument, the Apostle Saint Thomas and his journey is not a legend. It is quite possible because he could use the ancient sea route, the ancient commercial route. And there were Jewish colonies in the Malabar coast. And the churches which is supposed to be believed to be erected or established by Saint Thomas Apostle were in the vicinity of this Jewish settlement of early centuries. So there was Judeo-Christian and Aramaic connection and continuity between the Persian church and the South Indian church right from the very beginning. And Syriac, by this, the Syriac was the language of the Persian Empire. Aramaic was its former form, and from AD 2nd century onwards, it developed Syriac language and the official language of Persian Empire, and the same apostolic tradition of the Persian church and the Malabar church made to establish a relationship between these 2 churches. And thus, somehow, Syriac became the liturgical language of St. Thomas Christians. Now, the Pesach celebration, ablutions, purifications after death, Aramaisms or their Syriac, this all shows that this relationship is quite possible. There were no statues or even pictures in the churches of St. Thomas Christians, which might be latent Jewish heritage as well as East Syrian tradition. Another reason or another evidence for this Jewish or Aramaic influence is that there are the Pesach celebration. Maybe it is the unique celebration of Syrian Christians, so St. Thomas Christians is a Pesach celebration. Nowhere in the world, Christians celebrate the Pesach in their houses as the St. Thomas Christians celebrate. Pesach is a Jewish family celebration. It was in original form, it was a Jewish family celebration. Later, during the renovative periods of King Josiah, that is in 700 BC, this family celebrations became a national celebration, and how home-centered celebration became temple-centered celebration. The original around 1,000 years, Pesach was a quite family celebration. And this Pesach celebration is still preserved, continued and celebrated among the Syrian Christians. And this points to this Jewish patrimony or Jewish relationship. And another thing is Jews never used any statues in their temples or worship places. So too, the St. Thomas Christians, the early Christians, never used statues, images like that for their worship or liturgical purpose. The relation between South Indian Church and Persian Church goes back to the days of Apostle Thomas. The Persian Church was the fruit of his first mission. His second mission resulted in the emergence of St. Thomas Christian in South India. It's already explained. In the late 3rd century, David of Basra came to South India to help the St. Thomas Christian. The first Persian bishop who visited Kerala is David of Basra. And after him, the St. Thomas Christians or the South Indian Christians established a strong relationship between Persian diocese or Persian church, and that relationship continued still the arrival of Portuguese missionaries. The spiritual needs of the St. Thomas Christians were fulfilled or satisfied by the Persian bishops. In the 5th and 6th centuries, some Indian Christian students and scholars had been associated with the school of Edessa and Nisibis. South India had hierarchical relationship between Persia proper. By 9th century, this takeover was complete. So we had them hierarchical relationship. The Church of St. Thomas Christians was more congregational than episcopal. What is the difference between episcopal and congregation? Congregation, the lay people got the predominance and power or control over the church. The temporal governance of the church was under the control of the lay people. And the Episcopal Church, it was controlled by the episcopoi or the bishop, a bishop-centered church. The St. Thomas Christian was a lay-centered church. MRC Media, do you find some problem there? Do you? If you find a problem, please raise your hand. No. I have seen certain gestures you were doing there. Okay, no problem. Are you all right? Please, okay. Please unmute your mic and you can speak. Maybe their internal problem.
No. For a few minutes, you were not audible, Father. Now it's okay.
Okay. Now you adjust your microphone or your computer. The volume of your computer, please. It's all right now.
It's okay.
Okay, fine. Now, we were saying that the Church of St. Thomas Christians was more congregational than episcopal. The ruling authority was the hands of Palliyoga, presided by the Archdeacon and who is known as the Gate of all India. All the manuscripts burned by Diamber Synod indicate that the Church of St. Thomas Christians was theologically, spiritually, liturgically, canonically, an East Syrian church. How this East Syrian relationship came into practice? That is the same apostolic origin. And this same apostolic origin gave certain vicinity between these two churches. And later, the bishops from Persia came for the spiritual assistance of St. Thomas Christians. And this hierarchical relationship was established. So, spiritually, theologically, liturgically, and canonically, the East Syrian tradition was adopted by St. Thomas Christians. Now, this is a picture how the St. Thomas Apostle can or could come to Kerala or the Malabar shore. This graph will show that. This is the Sinai Peninsula, where the Palestine, the ancient ports of the Palestine, Joppa, or the ancient ports like Byblos. And from here, through this trade route, it's quite easy to reach the Malabar coast, especially St. Thomas. It is said that he came Musuris, the ancient Malabar port, Musuris. See this route, it's quite possible. In the first monsoon period, the ship starts its voyage from the Sinai Peninsula. Within 40 days, it reaches quite naturally by the help of the monsoon wind here in the southern coastal area of Kerala. And in the second monsoon is opposite direction. The wind is opposite direction. And by the first week of October, if a ship starts its journey, within 40 days, quite naturally, it arrives at the Sinai coast. This is the trade route. This was a trade route. More than 120 ships were traveling through this trade route in the first or second or third century BC. So it is quite possible how St. Thomas came to Kerala using this commercial trade sea route. He could come to the Malabar coast. It's quite possible. And we believe that Saint Thomas the Apostle has established 7.5 churches. What are the 7 churches? Now we name the 7 churches. And when we say that Saint Thomas the Apostle has established 7 churches, don't mean or don't think that he established material constructions of church edifices as we see today. It is better to understand that he established 7 Christian communities, 7 worshipping communities. This is a most accurate understanding is that the apostle had established 7 worshipping communities in the Malabar coast. And we have references about these 7 communities and which was founded by Saint Thomas in the ancient literature like Rampan-Pat, etc., under the Acts of the Apostle Saint Thomas, the apocryphal book, Acts of the Saint Thomas, and the ancient literature, Rampan-Pat, etc. Now, the first church or worshipping community established by Saint Thomas is Kodungalur Church. The river Periyar splits into 2 at Alvai, and its branch named Mangalapura reaches the sea passing through part of Kodungalur, Vadakekara, Tiruvanchikulam, etc. And Kodungalur located on the sea coast. Kodungalur finds a mention of in the Roman document as Muchiri. It was the capital of Chera kings. The ancient kingdom in Kerala is Chera, and Kodungalur was the capital of Chera kings. According to the tradition, Saint Thomas baptized the ruler of Kodungalur, his family, and 40 Jews. Please pay your attention on these 40 Jews. That is, Kodungalur was the vicinity of a Jewish settlement. Who were the first Christians in Kerala? We have the answer from the historical facts. The first Christians in Kerala, obviously not the Brahmins, but the Jewish Christians. We establish the roots of our heritage, or we find the origin of our patrimony in a Jewish Christian community. So there was a strong Jewish settlement in the 1st century AD, and many of them who were in expectation of the Messiah believed in the good news proclaimed by the Saint Thomas Apostle and got baptized, and they joined in the community. Then second one, Kollam Church. Kollam was one of the main port cities of Arabian coast. Rampan-Pat says that during the 1 year Saint Thomas stayed there, and he could convert 1,400 persons to Christianity. Third one, Niranam Church. From Kollam, Saint Thomas went to Trikkapaleshwaram near Niranam on the Tiruvalla Mavelikara route. From Kollam, he went to Niranam and established a community there. And the fourth one is Nilakal Church. According to the Rampan-Pat, Saint Thomas lived in Nilakal for an year. Nilakal is known as Chayal in certain documents. This was once a prominent city and a commercial center. Even now, there are trade routes from here to Tamil Nadu through Sabarimala. Now, the Nilakal, we have an ecumenical church. And there was the Nilakal strike and many problems. The Hindus argued that the Nilakal whole area belongs to the sanctuary of Sabarimala. So we have to make certain settlements with the Hindu fundamentalists and the ancient Christian center. We are forced to hand over. And as a compensation, we got 4 or 5 acres of land, and we constructed there an ecumenical church in Nilakal. The fifth one is Kokamangala Church. This is a Christian-dominated area in the coast near Pallipuram in Cherthala. Saint Thomas is believed to have lived here for a year and converted 1,600 persons to Christianity. The place named Pallipuram is also very important. That last month I have went there at Pallipuram Church, and I have seen the cross of Saint Thomas, the remnant of the cross of Saint Thomas, which is believed that in the year AD 52, they somehow got on the on the river shore of Pallipuram, and they established their church and worshipped or venerated that cross and called it as Saint Thomas Cross. And still now we have the remnants of this Saint Thomas Cross in Pallipuram. So Kokamangalam was a very strong place where Saint Thomas performed his mission. And another we have Kottakav Church. This place was known as Kottakayal or Pattamana Paravu. The church founded by St. Thomas was destroyed in the attack of Tipu Sultan in the 18th century. Now we have a reconstructed church. And another one, Palayur Church. Palayur is otherwise known as Chavakad, a coastal village in Ponnani Taluk, Malappuram district, was the place of St. Thomas last visited. Palayur was a Jewish settlement. The proof for this name, for these names of the place in the vicinity such as Yudakunnu and Yudakulam, Yudakunnu, hill of the Jews, or the pond of the Jews. Such places works as an evidence or proof for the presence of Jews in that area. These are the 7 churches which is established by St. Thomas. And we have a tradition that there is a half church, Keldarapalli, or half church also established by St. Thomas, which is the half church. We don't have any evidence. We have only, we can only assume, or we have the hypothetical conclusions. First is that Arapallikal Church. Another one is Tiruvankot Church, and third one is Malayatur Church. And there are other opinions. Some argue that the church Arivithura near Pala and the church at Arthat in Kunnangulam were also have been established by St. Thomas and belongs to the rank of half church. There is no unanimous opinion or any historical evidence for the identity of this half church. So we concentrate, however, that 7 Christian communities were established by the Apostle St. Thomas. And all these above mentioned 7 Christian communities were at the vicinity of ancient Jewish settlement, which points to the identity of origin of Syrian Christian community, which is obviously Jewish in its character. And now we were telling how could St. Thomas Apostle came to Kerala, the ancient relationship with South India and the Palestine, and the presence of Jewish settlement, ancient Jewish settlement, etc., and the traditions and the 7 churches, etc. And now we come to another point, that the selected patristic testimonies about the mission of St. Thomas in India. First one is the testimony of Panthenus. Who is known as Panthenus? Panthenus was a philosopher and a theologian in the Alexandrian school. You know, when we say that Alexandrian school, the ancient church, the 1st century or 2nd century church, there were mainly 4 catechetical centers. First Jerusalem, then Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome. These are the major 4 catechetical centers. In the 3rd century, there came Edessa to the rank of catechetical center. So in the 1st century, the church, after the Pentecost, went beyond Jerusalem, and the first center, Christian center, was Antioch, and then Alexandria. Alexandria is in Egypt. Panthenus was a theologian of this Alexandrian church. He was originally a philosopher, a Stoic philosopher, a Greek Stoic philosopher, and he converted and he embraced the Catholic Christian faith and became one of the think tank of the early church. Panthenus was a missionary. The famous ecclesiastical historian Eusebius, in his ecclesiastical history, narrated that Panthenus has visited the Indian church. So also Saint Jerome attest that Panthenus visited Indian church. And Panthenus, in one of his work, recorded that there is a community in South India which is known as Saint Thomas Christians, and they claim their origin on Apostle Saint Thomas. So we have the testimony of Panthenus, the philosopher, theologian of the 1st century. Another one, we have a book, an apocryphal book, Acts of Judas Thomas. This apocryphal work speaks of Saint Thomas' mission in northwest India, including Parthia proper and South India. This is an apocryphal writing, but which has its origin in the early 3rd century. So an ancient document. So is antiquity, considering the value based on antiquity, is something precious. And this book, we have references about the mission of Saint Thomas, both in South India and Northwest India. Another one, Clementine recognitions. That is also another ancient writing. This 3rd century work speaks about the first or Parthian mission of Saint Thomas. I have told you that there is strong tradition that Saint Thomas, the apostle, had made 2 mission journeys. First to Persia, and that mission could have come even the northwest part of the India. In Pakistan, there is a place, Khartoum, which is known as House of Saint Thomas. And in Pakistan, there is a place, Peshawar, and there is a community of Christians believe that they got baptized by the Saint Thomas Apostle. It is possible that using the ancient Silk route, Saint Thomas could come that northwest part of India and preach there and established a community. But during the Ottoman, Mughal, Muslim attacks, that community being perished, and a nominal number of Christians are still there, surviving there. So the Clementine recognition, that's a document on the first mission of Saint Thomas. Now we come to another point, the Syro-Malabar Church. The ancient Indian church is known as Syro-Malabar Church, otherwise the Saint Thomas Christian. The name Syro-Malabar is a misnomer and given by Rome in 1887, when the Oriental Catholic Saint Thomas Christians were separated from Latin or Roman Catholics of India. Syro-Malabar. The term Syro stands for Syriac or Christian Aramaic, the liturgical language of the community, until 1968. So still until 1968, the liturgical language of Kerala Christians were Syriac. So using that tradition, the Syriac, the appendage Malabar is the only Syriac rendering of Malankara, the traditional name of the church. So Syro-Malabar means Syriac liturgical language and the Malabar coast. Ever since the arrival of Portuguese in 1498, St. Thomas Christians were unofficially and informally leaning towards the communion with Rome, though with some reluctance and resistance when they realized the loss of Syriac heritage. The only thing which is disturbed the ancient Christian or St. Thomas Christians was after the coming of the Portuguese missionaries, they used Latin as a liturgical language because Latin was a liturgical language of the Roman Empire as well as the Roman Church. And here they found a community which is using other than Latin, Syriac, which is Greek to them. That means which is foreign to them. So they forcefully tried to change the liturgical language to substitute Latin for Syriac, and it made some tensions in their religions. Now we come to the 16th century of the Indian Christian church. So we have an early church here, performed theologically, liturgically, and canonically as East Syrian patrimony or heritage. Now we come to the history of this church in 16th century. In the first half of the 16th century, cordial relations between Portuguese missionaries and St. Thomas Christians existed to some extent. But already we find elements of friction because of Latinizing efforts of many missionaries. 17th century, Latinizing policies of Jesuit bishops who took over the Church of St. Thomas Christians ended up by a tragic split within the community. We'll explain these points in detail later. 18th century, troubles for Nazarenes began abound under the Carmelites and the propaganda. A series of reunion efforts between Puttankur and Pazhagur were started by the Carmelite missionaries. Their miseries, adventures, and achievements are recorded in the Vartamana Pustakam written in 1786. Then, concept of the church. The church is called Palli, a Buddhist term for believing community. For St. Thomas Christians, church is not at all a building or place of worship. Instead, it is an assembly of people. By using the term Palli, we never mentioned St. Thomas Christians never meant a material construction. Instead, always meant the assembly of faithful. A worshiping community is meant by the term Palli. When they say St. Thomas established 7 churches in Malabar Coast, they do not primarily mean that he built 7 buildings as places of worship. Rather, they intend that he gathered 7 communities who were to come together to a spot symbolized by Sliva or cross. Second term is Margam. Those who became the followers of the way of Jesus Christ through the way, Margam of St. Thomas the Apostle used to say to their children, "We are the children of St. Thomas the Apostle." Administration of the early church. The church or Palli was ruled by Palli Yogam, a democratic group of elders on the local, regional, and national level. It was a decision-making body of elders presided over the eldest priest. On the national level, it is called Malankara Yogam. National level, this administrative body of the St. Thomas Christian was known as Malankara Yogam, which was presided over by the Archdeacon of all India, who enjoyed the status of a Christian prince and ruler. Priests were ordained for a community with the written permission of Palli Yogam. Another word, agape. Agape of apostolic time is kept up even today to some extent. Different food items were offered and distributed in the church. 1/10 of wealth was offered to the common needs of the church. Fasting. On fasting days of Lent and Advent, the ancient St. Thomas Nazarenes used to take only a single meal after the evening prayer. It was their fasting. They were used to take only one single meal after the evening prayer. Pilgrimage. Nazarenes were found to making pilgrimage to places associated with the Apostle St. Thomas' mission and work in South India. Mylapore being the spot of his martyrdom, and tomb was one of the most prominent locations. On Dukarana, July 3rd, many used to visit Paravur Church for participating in the Chatham of St. Thomas. That is death anniversary. Chatham means death anniversary. Another regular pilgrimage to Paravur was on November 21st, the day on which St. Thomas landed at the Malyankara. Malayattur was another important pilgrim center. Another one, ancient feast was Rakuli Perunal. In the middle of the night of Danaha Epiphany, all St. Thomas Christians used to take a public bath in nearby river or pond before entering the church. This ritual bath is a reminder of the baptism of Jesus in Jordan and the burial custom of St. Thomas Christians. Dressed white, a symbol of the white garment of baptism. Even at funeral, the dead is wrapped in white clothes. The crown of baptism, crown of marriage, and crown of life at funeral are other meaningful symbols of religious identity. Nazarenes, like all other Oriental Christians, used to pray facing the east. Nazarenes dwelling far away from the church used to bury their dead near their house. They used to erect a burial stone with oil lamps. Every evening, they used to pour oil and light on these lamps. This was known as Purimada Seva, or service of the tomb. Service of the tomb. We come to the point. Growth and education of the early St. Thomas Christians. Even before official baptism, the newborn is considered to be a member of the community by the very birth from Nazarene parents. 40 days after the birth of a boy, but 80 days for a girl, the mother will not go to the church. The newborn baby is fed with a few drops of honey mixed with milk, gold powder, and herb vayamb. Some years later, the child undergoes Ezhuthiniruthu, that is switching or writing, or a process of initiation. Then about the marriage. Marriages were well planned and arranged between two families. Many native customs were adopted after Christianizing them. Taligat is a typical example. Tali means a golden leaf. It is used to ornament the married women's. And it's purely a Hindu tradition and is a classical example of inculturation. There are 7 threads are taken from Mandragodi for making tali. That's all simple narratives. Now we come to the second chapter. St. Thomas Christians in India, 50 to the 17th century. Traditions of St. Thomas and traditions of Thomas of Cana and the earliest Syrian connections. The identity of St. Thomas Christians is not exhausted by their being Indian and Christian. They are also Syrian. We can say that in faith they are Christian, culture they were Indian, and liturgy they were Syrians. The life or the picture of an ancient St. Thomas Christians was, by faith they were Christians, by culture they were Indians, and by liturgy they were Syrians. As Placid Podipara, one of the renowned church historian of Kerala, he says that in an emblematic writing of his, they are Hindu or Indian in culture, Christian in religion, and Syro-Oriental in worship, that I have explained. This speaks about the arrival of another Thomas, or Thomas of Cana, in Malayalam known as Kanai Thomman, a rich Syrian merchant from Persia according to one version, but a Christian Jew originating from Cana in Palestine, a relative of Jesus himself according to others. This happened in 345 AD. Normally, this date is taken for granted both in oral conversation and in writing. According to some, this Thomas of Cana came even earlier, so that he could still meet a servant of St. Thomas, while others hold that he came later, namely in 752 AD, some for 700 years after the apostle. The date 345 seems to come from, or at least to be documented by a Syriac text written by a certain father Matthew in Malangara in 1730. So when when Thomas of Cana arrived, answer is, the most common answer is 345 AD is approximate or commonly approved year of his coming. He came with 72 families and they were known as the Cananaya Church at present. The descendants of this Thomas of Cana is known as the Cananaya community. It is said that St. Thomas found the St. Thomas Christians in great spiritual need, and so he reorganized them and put them under the jurisdiction of Persian church. Anyway, this Thomas of Cana is a link between this Malabar church and Persian church. He organized or reorganized the relationship between Malabar church or St. Thomas Christians with the Persian church, and he facilitated the arrival of Persian bishops for the spiritual necessity of St. Thomas Christians. An important element of the tradition is the famous copper plates that Thomas of Cana is said to have received from the King of Malabar, the Chairman Perumal. That copper plate, which is allowing or permitting him certain rights or special rights or certain dignities in the Kerala community. In Portuguese time, there seemed to have existed the very copper plates that were claimed to contain the privileges that the Chairman Perumal King gave to Thomas of Cana. Identity and have an explicative value for their social reality. These plates shows the identity and social value of ancient Saint Thomas Christians. The division between two endogamous groups, the Southeast and the Northeast. The followers of this Thomas of Cana, his family, the descendants of Thomas of Cana, known as Tekkum Pagar or Southeast, and the traditional local Christians who were baptized by Saint Thomas the Apostle and their descendants, known as Northeast or Vadakkum Paga. The Southists claim that they have conserved pure Syrian blood. They claim that they are the descendants of Abraham. Thomas of Cana, that the tight jurisdictional and cultural relationship between the Church of Malabar and Persian Church is traced back. Church governance before the Portuguese period. According to the traditional structure, the Indian diocese of the Church of the East was governed by a metropolitan sent by Catholicos Patriarch from Seleucia, Ctesiphon. Local level in Indian Church affairs were governed by Malabar Yogam, that is an assembly. There was also an indigenous head of the Church of Malabar called the Malayalam Jadiki Kartavyan, or head of the caste, which is according to Jacob Kollambarambil means the head of the caste. That is the head of St. Thomas Christians, but also Archdeacon of all India. Archdeacon is the highest priestly rank. He is the head of all the clerics belong to the bishoprics. He is the responsible for the whole worship of the cathedral church and represents the will of the bishop in his absence. He was not a bishop, but an archpriest. He also fulfilled the role of an ethanar. He was the prince and head of the Christians of St. Thomas and had such titles as Archdeacon and Gate of all India, Governor of India, etc. etc. Now we come to another point, the Synod of Diamber and the Syrian Orthodox Mission in India. Still now, we were explaining a picture of Syro-Malabar Church, or sorry, the St. Thomas Christians before the arrival of Portuguese missionaries. And this Diamber Synod is a historical synod. When these Portuguese missionaries found a church here, totally different from theirs, they thought that this church is under heresy. It's a heretic group. They're practicing something quite differently. Their rubrics, their prayers are in quite a different language. Much of the things were not conspicuous to the Portuguese people. And the missionaries, with good intention, I would like to say that, with good intention, maybe with a good zeal, try to make things clear or to bring back the Christian, the group, heretic group, which according to their thinking, a heretic group, to the Catholic faith. So whatever things, which is better to believe that with good intention. So it is justifiable. With good intention, they tried to reform the Church of Kerala. Alexis de Menzies, Archbishop of Goa from 1595 until his death in 1617, together with his Jesuit advisors, decided to bring the Kerala Christians to obedience, an obedience that they conceived as complete conformity to the Roman or Latin customs. One point is that unity, we need a unity. That does not mean uniformity. What is prayed by Jesus is unity, not uniformity. There may be divisions, there may be difference, but we can still preserve unity. Unity is something internal. Instead, uniformity is something external. What these Portuguese missionaries, by their admirable missionary seal, tried to bring to the Kerala Church was not unity, instead uniformity. Forceful attempts for uniformity always make divisions. Is valid still present. Maybe in our parishes or our congregation or our churches. Why the Catholic Church consisted of 24 individual churches? Is we appreciate, the church appreciate unity, not uniformity. So any forceful attempt to keep uniformity will lead worst divisions. So we have to keep in mind that what is we are called to foster is unity, not uniformity. What is the problem between this Diamber Synod and the Portuguese missionary was their attempts to make uniformity. Synod of Diamber or Udayam Peru in 1599, when the local Christians' customs were officially anathematized as heretical and their manuscripts were condemned to be either corrected or burned. So, through the Synod of Diamber, a bulk material of antique writings, liturgical evidence, etc., were burned or be lost. So, we don't have any much direct first-hand written documents because all possible documents were burned by the missionaries. They were considered them as heretical. In order to foster the true faith, the missionaries burned all available ancient documents. Now we come to another arrival of Western missionaries. The French or Catalan Dominican missionary Jordanus Catalani was the first European to start conversion in India. He arrived in Surat in 1320 and he reached Koilon, that is Kollam, in 1323. He not only revived Christianity but also brought thousands to the Christian fold. He entrusted with the spiritual nourishment of Christian community in Calcutta, Calicut, Mangalore, and Thane near Bombay. Now we came to a point, a historical milestone, that is the arrival of missionaries. Still the arrival of missionaries, we have a church centered mainly a group known as something like a group centered on caste, an assembly of upper class. The St. Thomas Church of St. Thomas Christians were not at all a missionary church. They practiced and they worshipped, they celebrated the faith within themselves. This was not, and enjoyed all the privileges of an upper class community. It was an all-embracing church. They never meant or thought to embrace the marginalized or the people in peripheries. And now the picture is began to change by the coming of Portuguese missionaries. The real missionary seal of the Catholic Church or the gospel is introduced by the missionaries. Maybe we treat history mainly by subjective perspectives, you know. So I have told you that there does not exist an objective church history. The perspective of one who write or record the historical event is highly influencing the data. So when we think impartially, there were problems made by the interventions of created by the intervention of Portuguese missionaries. But beyond that, the real missionary seal of the gospel is introduced by these Portuguese missionaries. And the church became Catholic by their arrival. It's a historical fact. The church became Catholic in its true sense by the arrival of these missionaries. So first among such missionaries, Giordano Catalani in 1320. Another historical event. Recently, we were disturbed by a news that the Turkish government has changed the ancient monument Hagia Sophia again to an Islamic mosque. And we have here a reference the year 1453, where the ancient Christian city Constantinople, the antique bastion of Christianity in Asia Minor, fell into Islamic Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire has conquered Constantinople and it was an attack, severe attack on Christianity, especially in the Asia Minor. And it marked the end of Eastern Roman Empire and served European trade links by land with Asia. That is still that through Constantinople, the Silk route, ancient trade route from Europe to Asia near Kabul, passing Kabul to the Indus Valley. This was an ancient Silk trade route. That trade route is known as Silk route. And when the Ottoman Muslims conquered Constantinople, they blocked the trade route. So the Europeans forced to find out some other route to for the purchase of these products of South India. So they started to find out the great navigation adventures like Magellan, Vasco da Gama, Columbus, all started after the fall of Constantinople to the Ottoman Empire. Europeans were seeking alternative routes east by sea along with the goal of forging alliance with pre-existing Christian nations. The papal bull Romanus Pontifex, by the propagation of the Christian faith, Padruado in Asia, was given to the Portuguese. The missionaries of the different orders, Franciscans, Dominicans, Jesuits, Augustinians, etc., flocked out with the conquerors. So with the conquerors, missionaries also traveled. Vasco da Gama reached Kappad near Kozhikode on 20 May 1498. Portuguese mission in AD 15th century built up two churches, namely Santa Cruz Basilica and Saint Francis Church. In 1534, Pope Paul III by bull Quecum Reputamus raised Uncal as an archdiocese and Goa as its suffragan, deputing the whole of India under the Diocese of Goa. Saint Francis Xavier in 1545, the second apostle of India, wrote a letter to John III of Portugal, requested the Goan Inquisition, which is considered a blot on the history of Roman Catholic Christianity in India, both by Christians and non-Christians alike. The death of the last Metropolitan Bishop, Archdeacon Abraham of St. Thomas Christians, then Archbishop of Goa, Meneses an opportunity to bring the native church under the authority of Roman Catholic Church between 20 and 26 June 1599. So when the last bishop or administrator of St. Thomas Christian, who was known as Thomas III, died, the Portuguese missionary, especially Alexis Meneses, the Goan Archbishop, tried to make the St. Thomas Christian under his control. The origin of Christianity in North Konkan was due to the proselyting activities of Portuguese in the 16th century. Now we have another event, the Coonan Cross Oath, January 3rd, 1653. Background: Archbishop Goa, Alexis de Meneses, tried to influence and force the Malankara Church head Archdeacon Georgis of Pagalomatram family to bring the Malankara Church under the control of Roman Catholic Church. Archbishop Meneses influenced with the Raja, King of Cochin, and summoned a meeting at Udayamperu. The king threatened that absentees to the meeting would end up having their properties confiscated. Udayamperu Synod took place on 20th June 1599, led by Bishop Meneses, the Portuguese governor, higher government officials, and armed Portuguese soldiers with the full support of Raja of Cochin. Archdeacon Georgis, along with the 133 priests, 10 deacons, and 660 laymen attended this synod. The independence of the ancient church of Malankara was crudely crushed. Mar Ahatalla met two Syrian Christian deacons. Another story, this is all story, so I just pass, you can read it in your text. About the Coonan Cross Oath, or its historical background was, due to by the Diamber Synod, the Archbishop Govan Archbishop, Portuguese Archbishop Alexis de Menezes, tried to control over the church, and there were rebellions. And the extreme form or zenith of such a rebellions was Conan Cross Oath. The oath on January 3rd, 1653, under the leadership of Archdeacon Thomas and Anjalimutil Ittithoman Kattanar, a multitude of about 25,000 Nasrani Christians assembled at the Church of Our Lady in Matancheri near Cochin. The priests, leaders, and the people gathered near a big granite cross in the church grounds, since all the people could not touch the cross simultaneously. Because of the weight of the cross, bent a little, and hence it is known as Oath of the Bent Cross or Conan Cross Oath. The Conan Cross Oath in English means Oath of the Bent Cross. What was the oath? The oath was this: they will not accept no longer the commandments of Jesuits. That was the oath. No, because the Govan Archbishop Alexis Menzies and all the priests who were tried forcefully to convert the Syrian tradition to Latin were Jesuit missionaries. So the oath was like, we will not accept the Jesuits no longer. We will not obey the Bishop Menezes. We will not obey the Roman authority. We will not obey no longer the Pope. No, it was simply, we will no longer obey the commandment of Jesuits. That was the oath. And at that time, only 400 remained loyal to the Roman Archbishop Gracia. Chapter 6, Historical Division of Marthoma Nasranis. So, the year 1653 is an year crucial in the history of the Indian church. The great year of great division. The church divided into two. Until the aftermath of Conan Cross Oath in 1663, the St. Thomas Christians were united under a community head called Archdeacon. Conan Cross Oath and aftermath events. 12 Kattanars of Nazranis, priests of Kattanas, consecrated Archdeacon as a metropolitan at Edappalli on 22nd of May 1653. Some sent, and so when the division after the Conan Cross Oath, a group, the majority of the Syrian Christians, selected Archdeacon still as their head. They were elected to accept the supremacy of Alexis Menezes, the Govan Archbishop. And 12 priests together came and gave the episcopal consecration to this Archdeacon. So even if 1,000 priests come and desires to give episcopal ordination, that ordination is still invalid. Only the koinonia of bishops can ordain another as bishop. So the apostolic succession, the point is the apostolic succession is very important. So the new group or the majority, but they fell into a great error. That is, they tried to ordain by priest somebody as a bishop. Rome sent Carmelite missionaries under the leadership of Father Joseph Maria Sebastiani, AD 1657, and Father Vincent of Heisenberg in AD 1658 for reconciliation. So Rome came to know about this division. They drew back the Jesuits and sent the Carmelites. So the Carmelite missionaries came and they tried for reconciliation. Missionaries succeeded in convincing a group of Nazarenes, including Pallivitil Chandi, and the consecration of Archdeacon as metropolitan was not legitimate. Consecration of Archdeacon gained publicity. The Archdiakon started losing his followers. When the Archdeacon came, the people came to know that the episcopal ordination of the Archdeacon was illegitimate. The people obviously turned back to the authority of legitimate bishop. Joseph Sebastiani in 1659 was able to win 40 churches within a year. By 1663, only 32 remained with the Archdiakon. Remember that there were 400 churches with this Archdiakon. But after the reconciliation efforts of Carmelite missionaries, by the year 1663, only 32 remained with the Archdiakon. All other went back to the proper legitimate bishopric of Rome or the Portuguese. Before leaving, Sebastiani consecrated. Then in 1663, the Dutch defeated the Portuguese and declared that all Portuguese missionaries had to leave Malabar. So before leaving, Sebastiani consecrated a native priest known as Pallivitil Chandi as the Bishop of St. Thomas Christians and Vicar Apostolic of Archdiocese of Angamali on 1st February 1663. The community was thus divided into two factions, one under the leadership of Pallivitil Chandi Metran with a legitimate bishopric consecration, and the other under the leadership of Archdiakon or Marthoma I without a legitimate bishopric consecration. These two groups later became known as Palayagur Old Alliance or Puttankur New Alliance. After the death of Pallivitil Chandi Metran, the church had to wait until 1896 AD to get their first indigenous bishop, although the original see of the church, Angamali, was suppressed to wipe out any trace of an independent church with unrestricted jurisdiction. The two bishops sent by the Chaldean Patriarch Joseph VI, Audo Marthomas Rokos and Mar Melus, reached Malabar. This is known as the Rokos heresy and Melus heresy. Father Chavara Kuriakos Elias, Saint Father Chavara Kuriakos Elias. Anthony Tondanat to the Chaldean Patriarch consecrated him as a metropolitan. The Latin authorities of Mosul did not permit the Patriarch to consecrate a bishop for India. Eventually, the Assyrian Patriarch, non-Catholic faction, Mar Rowell Simon, consecrated Mar Abdisho Tondanat metropolitan in 1862. And this was the beginning of the Chaldean Syrian Church of the East, also known as Shurais in Thrissur, another denomination. During a Melusian schism, the Saint Chavara Kuriakos was the Vicary General of the Syrian community. He tried to reconcile the Syrian community, made resolve the divisions, especially he faced the Melus and Rokos heresies and made the faithful in the original Catholic faith. Now the Puttankur faction is divided into 5 churches: the Jacobite Syrian Church, Malankara Orthodox Church, Marthoma Syrian Church, Syro Malankara Catholic Church, Malabar Independent Church. In the Puttankur faction, now we have 5 divisions in that. The first split within the Puttankur faction, formation of Malabar Independent Marthoma Church. And now we have a diagram here, the history and evolution of St. Thomas Christian. How the historical divisions. Please look that. The red is the Catholic. Here we have 52 AD. Still 16th century, no division. In 1653, the Kunan Rosor. Here we have Puttankur fraction. Here the Palayagur fraction. The Puttankur fraction, 5 divisions. Malabar Independent Syrian Church, Marthoma Syrian Church, St. Thomas Evangelical Church, Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church, Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church, Syro Malankara Catholic Church. Syro Malankara Catholic Church's origin is 1930. From this Jacobite Syrian and Malankara Orthodox Church, a small group made a reunion with the Catholic Church. They are known as Syro Malankara Church. Instead, the Palayagur fraction came here, and in 1814, it was a division. Syro Malabar Catholic Church, the main, and Assyrian Church of the East, a small group who are known as Shurais. They are mainly located in the Thrissur district of Thrissur. Now, we have chapter 10, various Christian missions in India. By the year 1540, The Portuguese had established themselves firmly on the west coast with their main mission center at Goa and stations at Kranganur, Kodungalur, and Kochi. Under Portuguese influence, there had been many conversions to Christianity, resulting in the creation of an Portuguese Christian community, though of rather unsatisfactory quality. The first man to the chosen was Francis Xavier. Francis Xavier was educated in Paris, where he had come under the influence of Ignatius Loyola. In 1540, when he set out for India with the object of reclaiming for Christ the heathen population, otherwise conquer the East for Christianity. Francis Xavier is justifiably called pioneer of missions in Asia, of which India had a share. By his sympathy for the poor and the lowly, by his energy and spirit, by his utter fearlessness in the face of dangers, and his supreme faith in his mission. His consuming desire was to spread the message of Christ far and wide. He was dogmatic and intolerant, but it was the outcome of his blind faith. By starting various schools at important places, Francis Xavier contributed also to the spread of education in India. The fact that he showed special concern for the sick and the poor, particularly the fisher folk, increased his popularity. His spirit has been an inspiration for a generation of Christian workers in India. The history of Indian Church, especially the missionary history of Indian Church, we cannot forget the figure of Saint Francis Xavier, the most renowned zealous soul of Holy Catholic Church. His contribution, now we have a church in the coastal areas, his contribution. Now we have a Catholic church, a missionary church, his contribution. So the church went beyond the barriers of caste, first due to the missionary works of especially Saint Francis Xavier and other Portuguese missionaries, European missionaries. Another one, Robert de Nobili and the Madurai mission. Saint Francis Xavier, established in India, took up with enthusiasm the work of conversion. Robert de Nobili, a brilliantly gifted, highly educated and zealous man, came to be the charge of mission in Madurai, Tamil Nadu. De Nobili, a man of remarkable insight, who came with the desire to convert as many Hindus as possible to Christianity. After a short experience of life, Madurai reached the conclusion that Christianity would have little success in India if it kept to its Western garb and refused to understand the mind and thought of people of the country. The problem before him was to make Christianity acceptable to Hindus without being imposed on them. He received the answer from St. Paul, who said that while preaching, one has to get naturalized in the culture of community for whom the message is meant. De Nobili obtained the approval of the Jesuit mission to undertake a serious study of Hinduism, and Madurai was specially suited for this purpose. Years of his arduous work, in the course of which he acquired a fair mastery of Sanskrit, he met in argument the learned Brahmins of Madurai in religious discussions. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9:20, St. Paul says that to Jews I became Jew. In order to win Jews, those who under the law, I became as one under the law, though not be myself under the law, that I might win those who under the law. Mission groups could not appreciate Nobili's attempt to represent Christianity in Hindu garb. Rome forced Nobili to abandon his methods and forbade him to baptize. He was accused of corrupting Christianity by admitting Hindu practices into it. Intolerance of things Indian became henceforth the characteristic feature of missionary zeal in India. The Mughal mission, another one. And acquainted himself better with the Christianity, Emperor Akbar invited scholarly Christian missionaries to his court. They were well received and they held several discussions with the empire. That was known as the Mughal, but with the Muslim fanatic attitudes of Akbar and their Muslim Mughal empire, the mission works were not fully succeeded. Another one, we have an assessment of the Portuguese missions. Christianity had grown up in Indian soil as a naturalized religion and was accepted as one among the Indian religions. The Christians were respected and honored by the rulers, leaders, and the higher caste. In martial, commercial, and cultural achievements, the Christians also made their contribution. Foreign missionaries of 16th and 17th centuries, particularly the Portuguese, who imposed to a large extent ignorant or ill-informed of the social life and customs of India, and consequently failed to appreciate them. The Coonan Cross revolt in 1653 at Mattancherry near Cochin marked the final outbreak and split the Christian community into two groups. One remained in communion with the Pope, and the other took an oath known as Coonan Cross Oath and decided to serve all communion with the Rome and keep its identity and autonomy. The Christian mission did not make much inroads into the world of caste Hindus or Muslims in the 16th century. The missionary efforts of the Portuguese were mainly confined to small pockets in India where they held political power. Christianity spread mainly among the employees of the Portuguese and the depressed class. Christianity and their missions were interpreted as means for the extension of Western political control and aggressive imperialism. Many right-thinking Indians had expressed their amazement at this dubious association. The words of Jawaharlal Nehru are illustrative. The gospel of Jesus, the gentle but relentless rebel against untruth and injustice, could so easily be made a tool of imperialism, capitalism, and political domination. The Dutch and the British who came after the Portuguese were interested solely in trade. Moreover, they were Protestants and had no sympathy with the activities of the Catholic orders. The Protestant mission, we have the Protestant mission. I just ask you to just go through this part in your textbook. And we have the British period. The British government had three rules in India. First, that of a trader. Second, that of a ruler. And then that of a Christian propagandist. In the early years of its rule, the company had taken a position of neutrality with regard to the religious and social affairs of its subject. The East India Company decided not to interfere with the traditional cultures of people by supporting missionary work. In 1833, the policy of the company was changed under pressure from the evangelicals in England. This marked the first decisive step of missionary work in India. They made provision for Anglican hierarchy in Calcutta. Later, Protestant missionary operations were undertaken on large scale by LMS and CMS. The characteristic feature of 19th century missions was the enthusiasm for multiplication of missionary efforts. The priority of colonial missions was conversion. Conversion of individual souls was considered as the sole end of mission. A new set of missionaries rooted on the iconoclastic seal of extreme Protestantism began to arrive. Some like that Charles Grant, Claudius Bauham, etc. William Bentinck in March issued his resolution intended mainly to promote European literature and science and utilize funds mainly for English education. Alexander Duff, Scottish missionary and leading educator whose ideas can be considered representative of the majority of missionaries in the 19th century, thought that though Hindu philosophical discourse contained lofty terms in its religious vocabulary. So this is almost about after the coming of the English people or Dutch and English, Protestant and Anglican faith came to the land of India. And they, after the initial stage, using their political powers, tried to evangelize the part of India, mainly obviously that they shared the Anglican faith. So the Catholic mission was successful and great during the period of Portuguese missionaries. Almost all the Christian mission centers, Catholic mission centers were established, developed, and fostered by the Portuguese missionaries. They have made many contributions to the native church, although, as the critics raises, they destroyed the heritage or the patrimony or the antique records, traditions of the church. They made the Indian church as a Catholic church. They purified the clergy. We had a marital clergy who were engaged in marital relationship, who were engaged in a commerce and like that. So they increased the dignity of clergy. They made a clear order to the church. And they established the parishes, dioceses, and a clear system. They arranged the church systematically. And they were zealous in the preaching of true Catholic faith. And we can say naked fact that there were many heretical thoughts or beliefs passed in the Marthoma Christians through centuries by the contact with the Persian bishops. Many came here. Some of them were Nestorians or the heretical, belongs to the sectical groups. And their preachings, teachings also were influenced this community. So with the Diamber Synod, it had its consequence, side effects is bitter remembrance, but it, in fact, with a good intention. It purified the church, renewed the church, renewed the clergy. So it is due to the coming of the missionaries, the church in Kerala became, in the whole sense, Catholic and missionary church. So in each disaster or in each unhappy thing, God gives another providence. And in that also, in the history of, we have many atrocities, bad events, unhappy events. In that we can find certain glimpse of joy and a glimpse of goodness. So to the history of Indian church, we have a church here which goes back to the period of St. Thomas Apostle, a church which is elder than the Roman church. In Rome, actually, the faith or the apostolic presence started in the year 60s, St. Paul and St. Peter. But we have a church here which has its roots in 52 AD, a church elder than the Roman church or any or the Alexandrian or Antiochian church, an ancient church. It is antique apostolic origin. That faith we have to preserve, and we have to cherish that faith. Moreover, every Catholic faith is equal. We are trying for unity, not for uniformity. We cannot claim some right or something is superior to another. All are equal before, all are receiving and practicing and celebrating faith in Jesus Christ. So we were narrating the ancient hegemonies or the certain boasting stories of the St. Thomas Christian. You may be belong to Latin Rite or some other religious denomination. Don't feel bad. This is a perspective of Christian, Syrian Christian perspective. Don't feel bad because we don't have any objective history. So I cannot adamantly say that this is all true and that all bad. No, we don't have an objective history. So every historical record is subjective. So to whatever we have narrated is some things, there are certain parts of truth and certain traditions, certain beliefs. So we have to scrutinize them. We have to reread them, analyze them. We have to read between lines. That's all about the Indian church history.